Um, so I'm James Harkin, Director of the Centre for Investigative Journalism in London. And I've just 15 minutes ago finished watching Collective, a film by Alexander Nanau, who's here with me to talk about it. A film which begins with a story about a fire in Bucharest, which is marred in corruption, and which unravels into a much bigger story about a whole hospital system and perhaps political system, which is itself marred in corruption. First of all, it's a fantastic piece of work. It has as many twists and turns as a good thriller. It really is an outstanding documentary. Maybe Alexander, you could start us off by talking about yourself and how you came to the project. Obviously, this was a big story in Bucharest, but maybe you could talk about your work and how you came to thinking that you could add something to this story.
Right. So, yeah, my name is Alexander Nanau, and I'm the director of the film. The thing is, when the fire happened in Bucharest, it really was a national tragedy, because it was a very popular club where a lot of young people went to every weekend. There were concerts and so forth. And the fact that it happened reminded everybody that it could have been their children. I mean, I remember during that night that everybody was crazy calling his kids and seeing if he has friends or anybody in the club. So it was really a big thing. And it started these mass demonstrations, which were really the biggest since the revolution in 1989. And for the first time, there was a young generation on the streets claiming for a corrupt political class to step back, because everybody knew it has, the reason for the tragedy was also corruption, because the club was functioning with an authority by the firemen and by the city without having fire exits. And that actually moved me. For sure, I thought about, it seems to be a turning point in the society, because it started before in Hungary with the demonstrations about the university that Orban closed. And it seemed, we had the feeling that it's something that will happen to the whole of Eastern Europe, maybe a kind of a 68 of Eastern Europe, a young generation claiming their parents' generation to step back and get rid of their habits and corruption. But only when I realized, we realized right from the beginning that there was a big manipulation, that the authorities, together with the doctors and the healthcare system responsible persons, were just lying to the whole country that was grieving, that they can take care of this burn victims, that they are able to manage the whole situation and they don't need help. Which, seeing who they were, most of all the politicians and the authorities that were taking care of the healthcare system, knowing that they were corrupt, knowing that they were really incompetent people, not having a lot of corruption scandals going on, and being very clear that they are not able even to take care of the government, we knew that something is very fishy. And we knew the Romanian hospitals. It was impossible that they are as in Germany, as they said. And then we started to think about how to make a film, because I do observational documentaries. And I wanted to avoid another film where we see crowds in the streets, we interview people that tell you what is happening. It's something that I was not interested in, because every film I do has to be an intense experience for me and a learning experience for me. So I need to learn new things by getting close to the life of other people. And so, because Tolontan in the film, the main character, or one of the main characters, the investigative journalist, and his team were the only ones questioning the authorities, and were the only ones starting to expose their lies about how they treat the burn patients, and that they are able to do it. We thought that would be the best, would be the ideal character to follow in order to understand the relationship between the power and citizens, and how this relationship works and how the communication works. And so we approached them, and asked them if they could imagine to let us film their work, that because it seems that there will be a lot more that they're going to uncover.
And that sort of brings me to my next question, Alexander. How far was Tollentine into his investigation when you got agreement to work with him on the story, or did you know him before?
I didn't know him before personally. I mean, he's well known in Romania because he is a really experienced investigative journalist that does this since over 20 years. But as you can see in the film, his specialty is the sports world. I mean, he is the editor-in-chief of the Gazeta Sporturilor, the Sports Gazette. But his passion was in investigative journalism. So he has this, in the newsroom, he has his investigative team. And so they did bring sports ministers down. They did bring important people in the football world down when they uncovered corruption with buying and selling players and so forth. But it was new to them to investigate the healthcare system. But because it was such a national tragedy, they felt obliged to bring their knowledge into this field and to start investigate what is really happening behind closed door in the healthcare with these patients. And so he knew for sure, he already uncovered that the firemen were lying, because what they did, they came out and said, we didn't know the club existed. So he uncovered this lie. That they even approved, that they even authorized the club. And then the Minister of Health at that time, with the hospital manager and the biggest professors in the country, were all lying that the patients are treated in a newly opened burn unit. And they discovered this newly opened modern burn unit was closed with a lock. It was just a unit that they opened earlier to just to justify all they have purchased there and to get their bribes. So the unit was not functioning. So that was the big discovery. And then when we came in, he got word already that there is something, that the infections will kill them. And that's also the moment we came in.
Yeah. And one of the best lines in the film, I think, is where he says, it falls to, or one of the demonstrators says, it falls to a simple sports paper to uncover all of this, which maybe tells you something about the state of investigative journalism elsewhere.
Because the whole press failed at that time. The whole press, the whole country's press, just picked up what the authorities were saying and just propagated it, just passed it on without verifying it for real. They just bought it.
Yeah. I think it maybe says something also about having a niche and a source of expertise. That might be one future of investigative journalism, where you actually know something because you're covering this beat for other reasons, and then you get to be investigative when something goes wrong. But I have to ask, was it easy to work with a newsroom of reporters, and did you have to do any reconstructions of those conversations?
No, we don't do reconstruction. So I work completely observational. It was, it's hard to say if it was easier. It's always complex and complicated, to work with people and film them. And my job is then to really make, disappear in a way and really make them feel as comfortable as possible, so that they really don't feel any restraints or don't feel that they have to, behave in a certain way for the camera, which is not simple with journalists and with strong characters, because they're used to be on the other side. But I think that because of the speed with which this vortex of corruption came up, and because of the speed it all took on, nobody had time to think about anything anymore. We were just in this, in this very fast car, and became, in a way, it became organic. We were there, but they were so preoccupied with doing their, with was doing their work, that it helped a lot just to be able to work observationally.
And they must have had concerns about working with a documentary crew about the protections of sources and the sort of protection of material.
That's why they said, when we approached them first, they said no. I mean, it's not possible, and a newsroom is something that has to be protected. The information here has to be protected. The journalists have to be protected, and our whistleblowers have to be protected. So it's impossible to do what you propose to do. But then he saw, because when we started the project, we put together our own investigative team of journalists in order to, we did dozens of hours of interviews with people to see who could be the right character to follow in this whole thing in order to understand this mechanism and working over society. And we spoke with doctors, we spoke with politicians, we spoke with victims and parents. And for sure I understood that it will have to be, all these different perspectives. One character will not give you this understanding of the network in which decisions are taken that affect our private life. So he saw that we also had our own sources then from inside the system. And he saw how serious we are, and he saw how thorough our own people are working. And then he called one day and said, like, listen, we are onto something. We could try. Let's try. I don't know if we are on the right track or if we are completely on wrong, and it will end up in nothing, this investigation. But let's try. And only much later, I think, after we launched the film, he told me, like, the reason I called back then was because I realized that so many people out of a young generation are not reading any more press. They don't believe anymore in press, and they take the information from so many other sources because they don't know anymore how press works. And I had the thought that maybe if somebody, is able to show in a simple way, how a journalist works, maybe a film would be a good medium to reach people, to understand a bit that what we're doing is different from maybe the tons of news and fake news they receive every day in their feeds.
And I think it works very well as a film about process and the process of journalism. I think one of the most haunting presences is the colleague, I think, of Tolan Tan, the woman, who barely says anything, but her expression, I think, is haunting and drives so much of what I remember from that story.
She's very important for the team. That's what I learned, because what's so beautiful about the team is that she's really the instinct and heart of the whole thing. So she's actually the one who drives.
Which you get almost silently. You can see it's important, which is a nice thing.
And they argue a lot. And he's the brain, she's the heart. And Razvan, the young one, who is always keeping contact with the sources and whistleblowers through social media, and then he's the one who would hide in the bushes and find them. And so it's a great team. It's the way they work together is so organic, and it's a really wonderful team. And Razvan is 21.
Wow. So the film neatly divides into two halves, and the first half follows Tolan Tan and his team, and the second half follows, if I'm right, the efforts of a newly arriving health minister, a sort of technocrat and internationalist who spends a lot of his time saying sorry to people. And I wonder, is there a danger, if we can talk a bit more politically, that the film sort of takes a side by taking the side of that sort of internationalist technocracy against the existing troubled political system, and makes it look like that that these are all the heroes in ways which might sort of aggravate a local audience, or perhaps not? Is there other
there
concerns
isn't.
about
I mean,
a technocrat?
I think in the polarized world we're living in, that is always a danger now. But the fact that even the Minister of Health that Tolontan brings down, he's also a technocrat. So basically, the technocrats came in after the fire.
Yes.
So you have, we're not partisan with one, let's say, against a political party, or we just, my aim was only to understand how a normal human being that is coming up from outside the system will behave and will deal, and what will be his attitude regarding this whole responsibility and pressure. And so you have two technocrat ministers of health. One is from inside the system, and he says this very clearly. He says in the film, I'm part of the system. They made me, so you have to be aware of this. And the next one comes in to absorb, let's say, the negativity of the society that demonstrated and were in favor of the revelations of Tolontan. And he is, he's from outside the system. And what was interesting to me was to see that in a system, if people don't owe something to the system, like this new minister that came in, Blood, they can be open and honest. And he was the first person in a public position to say very clearly in front of all the journalists, we could not have treated these patients. It was a lie, and it was a political decision to lie. It was a decision that was taken on from the Minister of Health back then to the hospital managers, and we can only guess why they did it, and we learn later from the new whistleblowers, from the accountants, why they did it, because they prefer to spend the money in their hospitals than the state to pay for a treatment abroad in proper burn units for these kids. So they preferred to steal, knowing what the situation with the infections are in the hospital and knowing what the situation with the disinfectants are in hospitals. And that lack of humanity was a shock to all of us. We knew corruption exists, it's nothing new. But the lack of humanity, like knowingly killing people as a doctor, as a minister of health, as a politician, is something that, for sure, we're discovering it now, right? While we shot the film in 2016, the world started to turn upside down, and more populists took over democracies and started systematically what we knew how they work in Romania, to destroy state institutions by replacing professionals with incompetent people that would serve them for, in whatever decision they take. And I think this is also one of the points that is a warning, that it's, or what I learned. I understand that people vote against a certain system and a certain established system, but we can't really play around with it. We can't just vote with the extreme opposite that is just promising things without being professionals, because things like the fire happen in our lives that change our lives from one second to the other, or a virus, and then our life depends on the way the society we live in works, and if it doesn't work, it will kill us, and it will kill a lot of people.
Let's come back to the question about populism later, but just a couple of things about that are mentioned in the film that I wanted to sort of follow up with you in case there had been more information or the aftermath of the film, if you like. So the head of Hexi Pharma dies in a car crash. It's implied by some that might have been more than a car crash. Is there any more information about that?
No, I mean, the thing is, look, I think Tolontan is right here, because he says all the information that exists is that the DNA of the dead body, although he was unrecognizable after crashing into the tree, matched the DNA of the CEO of Hexi Pharma. As long as there are no other leads, facts, or information, we should not assume more.
Or a conspiracy, yes.
Or conspiracy, because it's wrong, and it was done by media in Romania that resembles, let's say, more the Fox News in the States, that they, like, for days and weeks, they were only riding on this conspiracy wave, like following his car on CCTV cameras and saying, was it him, wasn't it him, like, and yeah, I mean, that's bad journalism, right? As long as you don't really find more facts, you cannot just spread for weeks conspiracy theory.
Although sometimes it's difficult for real stories, which are, very moving like yours, to compete with conspiracy stories, which sound a lot better, but which turn out to be empty at the end. So at the close of the film, and again, we're talking about the aftermath here, but there's a warning or a threat to the members of the newspaper, the reporting team there. And I wondered if you could perhaps say anything more about that. What's happened in the intervening period, or how are they now?
I mean, it was just, I mean, they're really somebody from inside the Secret Service approached them and told them that it was, in a way, it was not, it might be misinterpreted sometimes. It was not that the service was menacing. They were just saying, like, okay, the political sphere is changing. People will change so just be careful, take care, because it might be that it might be that under a new government they lose their fear to attack you or to harm you and your families, which we see in many countries, right? Like, the situation changed drastically in Brazil once the power changed, and the situation and the danger of violence is something that we also have now in the States, and we from the whole world are looking now towards the States. What will happen? Because the bar for the readiness for violence has changed once, as in many countries, and it was in Romania, and it followed in Romania that really they changed the penal law and released a lot of prisoners from prison just to spread fear and to show the population that they can control people that can become dangerous.
But Sports Gazette is thriving and its circulation is doing well, and presumably it benefited from that story in terms of its circulation and general reputation.
I think so, yes. I mean, yeah, everybody, I mean, it was really one of the biggest investigations, and everybody learned about it and everybody was reading it. And what it did was that it really changed in a way the way people perceive the press, because they really brought such an important truth and changed through their investigation the way these disinfectants are authorized for the hospitals. Yes, I think that I can't tell you if their numbers went higher, if they sold more newspapers, but after, I think 1 year later, they were bought by Ringier, the Swiss media outlet, because they wanted Tolontan implemented in one of their big newspapers, daily newspapers in Romania, and they wanted him to build out more investigative teams. And this is what happened. Today, he's leading another paper called Libertatea. The Sports Gazette still exists, which is implemented in this whole thing, and he leads many investigative teams right now, and they are the main journalistic opposition power to the government, which changed in the meantime. It's not anymore the Social Democrats, but the corruption is still the same. And they are really the main force that is keeping up in exposing on a daily basis the wrongdoings of the government.
Again, talking about the aftermath, it may be a tricky question to answer, but in the longer term, who do you think benefited more from the story about that corruption? Was it the technocrats or the populists? I mean, we know that telling stories about corruption is very good if it leads to less corruption, but it can also lead can have terrible consequences if it leads other nefarious actors to sort of fulminate against the entire political system. But who do you think benefited in the longer term from that anti-corruption story and how it played out?
I'm not sure that there was really any political consequences for it, because what followed were 3.5 years of a very clear direction of governance. So the next 3 years, the Social Democrats really dismantled the judicial system. It happened as it happens in Poland, in Hungary. Really, they tried to change. So they changed the laws, first of all. They really tried to legalize corruption. When that didn't work out, because suddenly 300,000 people gathered in the center of Bucharest and the pressure was too high, they started to change the law in terms of how fast people can be released from prison, just for their people to get lower sentences for corruption. So I'm not sure that the benefit can be counterbalanced with was it a political. I think it was more important. It contributed to a slow awakening of the society, because the politics and the politicians didn't change at all. So they didn't get it. They didn't change. The judicial system didn't work properly. That means the same people are in the same key positions. Nobody was charged until now for the lies. But what happened is that society understood the importance of the quality of information again. And they understood that quality of information means liberty to decide upon your own life. And so we had the highest immigration numbers after that in 2017, 2018. I think we were, in terms of numbers, like the first after Syria, which is and is a war-torn country. But the other part of the population said, no, enough is enough. We're going to take back our society. And so we have now in Romania really the strongest civil society ever. It didn't exist before. For example, what the civil society is doing, they just built a hospital. So people are saying, and young people from private businesses with their own businesses are really organized into the civil society, and everybody puts in his knowledge, be it from IT to whatever, architecture. And right now, with the donations of many people, including Metallica, who donated, I think, 200,000 euro or something, they built a proper hospital, which is something the no government built since over 20 years. They're promising it every time before elections. And so there was an awakening. So the benefit was with the society, that they understood why they need press and why they need press of quality and the right information. And the veil was taking off. So, which means that in the elections that followed in the next year, the Social Democrats anyway, because they are the form of Communist Party, we know what their DNA is. They lost more and more. And now there's even a new party of people that come out of private businesses that form this party. Even our patients activist that was a Minister of Health's blood joined this party, and they managed to address the younger generation that really wants a change. And now we had local elections, for example, and they won several mayors, including the Bucharest mayor, and Vlad, who was a health minister back 4 years ago is now vice mayor of Bucharest and will take care of the hospitals in Bucharest and education.
So your conclusions in the film seem very pessimistic politically, but what you're saying is since then, there has been a turn for the better.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I wonder, perhaps this is the wrong kind of question then, but certainly in America and maybe to a lesser extent in Britain, people spend a lot of their time in journalistic circles now talking about the fact that maybe it makes no difference to publish investigative journalism because very often the people that we want to reach see us as part of a very remote, internationalized liberal elite, and they opt for the other side. Is there a similar problem in Romania? I think there's a couple of sentences in the film which imply that we were living in different worlds. Is there a danger of that we're perceived to be the enemy?
It's hard to say because the let's say the power of populist media that belongs to the moguls and that are very good at building dramaturgy and attracting a high number of viewers is for sure hitting hard towards investigative journalists that really unveil things. I think, I mean, what I see, I can talk about Europe because when I started to make this project and when I realized it will become a film about journalism, I really, you know, every time I do a film, I look what has been done in the history of film about a certain theme. And I was surprised to realize that actually European cinema does not and did not treat journalism. For sure, there are always journalists in the films, and there are some films that have journalist characters, but it was never treated in Europe as it was in the States with some iconic films about understanding why journalism really is a pillar of society. And it is in Europe that we take good press for granted, right? I mean, I also read the press since I'm 13, 14, and living in Germany, every weekend was very normal to read the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, the Zeit, the Spiegel would come out, and you know, it was for sure an elite thing. But I feel something is changing now because with the age of fear that is now happening, I feel there's a rebirth of journalism. And I have the feeling that more and more people understand that the only way to fight with the fear that comes from fake news, misinformation, you know, people driving us to that fear, the only, let's say, medicine against it is proper information of quality and knowledge. Because once we know things, we can lose our fear. So I don't see. I don't know. I never perceived it like that. That people perceive investigative journalism as something of an elite thing, but it is for sure very hard to compete with social media and the flux of information that is generated there, and it's very hard to compete with even let's say classic media like TV broadcasters that are in the hand of private people that are in the hand of politicians.
Well, I think we should leave it there. I hope you're right. Thank you very much for an optimistic, upbeat conclusion, and thanks for a wonderful film, Collective. So I wish you all the best with it, and hope to see you soon.